Hey everyone, Antoine Fantoine here, internet's sleepiest music nerd. Just got back from New York last night, did an interview over there for a video that I hope you guys see soon. Now you're watching this video because this is a new episode of the Needle Drop Podcast. On this episode we have the Nerdwriter on YouTube, Mr. Evan Puschak. He is a great culture critic and pop culture writer, very thoughtful videos on his YouTube channel, which of course are linked below. And in this video podcast, we are going to be listening, talking about, you could tell I just woke up, we're going to be talking about album promotion in the internet age, album rollouts in the internet age, traditional album sort of promotion models, the old school of album promotion, just kind of from the standpoint of fans. You know, we're not PR people, so we're not talking about it in that respect, but we're also talking about how all these new surprise albums are dropping, how artists like Death Grips and Kanye West are completely breaking the album promotion mold. So we talk about all of that in this episode, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Now, if you want to support this podcast, you can do what you're doing now. Watch it on YouTube, comment, share, like this video. You can also subscribe to our iTunes feed where you can find backlogged episodes of this podcast. We have lots of great episodes that have come up in the past in this show, lots of great guests, so check those out. You can get up-to-date episodes sent straight to your email inbox for a small monthly fee through our support page, which is linked down there in the description, and you can use our Amazon Associates link if you live in the US. Anything you buy off Amazon, we get kickback from it. Does not add to the overall price of whatever you're buying on Amazon. Use it to buy stuff you were going to buy anyway. And that's it, guys. That's how you can support the podcast. Thank you very much for listening. And let's just get to the episode. Bah! Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. By now you know who it is, and it's time for another episode of the Needle Drop Podcast. In this episode, we are having a conversation with Mr. Evan Puschak. He is also known on YouTube as the Nerdwriter. He is a culture critic and, culture writer, as I said, and because it does come in his name. And on his YouTube channel, you can catch thoughtful think pieces on art, politics, and pop culture, things from the influence of dance hall on modern pop music to Trump's relation to democracy today. And in this episode of the show, we are going to be talking about the release process of new music and album rollouts from, I guess, the standpoint of fans, because to my knowledge, neither of us are in or have a history in PR. And we're going to be basically dissecting what that is in the internet age, because album rollouts are certainly not what they used to be. Promotion, the saturation of new music, the dissemination of new music, the internet has revolutionized all of that, and we'll be diving into that today, talking about some modern releases, some new releases, some contemporary releases from the likes of Radiohead, Beyonce, James Blake, Death Grips, and more. So, Evan, thanks for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure to be here, and I think I speak for the rest of your fans when I say, why isn't the James Blake review uploaded yet?
Oh, God damn it. Because I have to do the Death Grips review first, and that's not even uploaded yet. So
you're forgiven.
I got to do the Death Grips first. People are pissed that I didn't review the leak, and I waited for the high quality version.
I think, there's no YouTuber whose comments I enjoy reading more than yours.
Yeah, the comment section is a special place on my YouTube
Needle
channel.
drop comments.
The needle drop comments, they can be kind of brutal sometimes. A lot of them recently have centered around my hairline, which is kind of confusing because it's been the same since like fucking 2009. I just have like very fine hair, and when I shave my head, you can lo and behold see the skin of my scalp. So there's like, kind of this like 9/11 truther style like conspiracy conversation going on about whether or not I'm balding on the internet.
I use your hair length as a way to determine. I don't even look at the upload dates. I just use it as a way to determine what period of time we're in.
The last time I grew my hair out, it was cold, and I just decided to do it during the warmer months now, and I don't know why.
We'll see. Usually it doesn't take me too long to just get sick of having hair, and I get lazy, and then I just want to shave it again. And also simultaneously, when I have hair on my head, it's kind of weird because when I see pictures of myself and I see like, logos and images of me, I just feel like, man, I'm just not being consistent with my brand right now.
And these are the substantive things we will continue to talk about on the Needle Drop podcast. Stay tuned.
Okay, so you are you're not an old man, but you're of an age close to mine, and you're old enough to remember a time in popular music when you weren't learning about everything that you were listening to via social media. You weren't getting all of your media through the computer. You were probably listening to new music that you enjoyed on things like the radio, or maybe even hearing about new albums and artists that you cared for through channels like MTV.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, is there anything that from time to time you kind of look back on in that era and that you kind of miss?
The one thing I sort of miss is like going to Best Buy or some store that carried just tons of CDs and just picking random stuff out and going back to my car, which is where I used to listen to most of my music, and discovering something that way. I feel like the main change for me as the internet has grown up is not so much in the way that I hear about music, but in the way that I filter it through like the critical review universe. Like it's sort of what has happened to me with films too. I'll never go see a film in the theaters unless I check Rotten Tomatoes, because it's $15 for a movie. I don't want to spend so much money on something that's not going to be good. So I look at that first, and I end up doing that online with music too much now too. And I sort of miss just listening to things without any knowledge of what it's actually going to be like.
What's the cost that you're trying to avoid wasting in instance of a new album, though? Because a lot of the time the music isn't necessarily costing you anything, as much of the new releases today are available online to stream for free. You're not paying that $15 entry fee like you would with a big blockbuster release.
I just think it's habit. Like I don't even really think that there is a cost reason there for music. It's just, there's so much music coming out, and I've relatively recently become obsessed with new music. And I used to be really into sort of, lots of classic music. And I felt very stunted in my listening because my parents never really played that much music when I was growing up. I never had that much of an education. So even as I was like getting into high school and college, I was still discovering all the things that you're sort of meant to have listened to. And when I got into newer music and became obsessed with new releases and things were coming out, it was like there was this huge wave of catch up I had to do on the new music side too. And so in order to parse what I should listen to, in the same way where you'd be like, what kind of classic book should you read, just to get a sort of overview of what's happened, I went to review sites like Pitchfork and other things, and saw what they thought was great, listened to it, and that gave me, I guess, a little bit of comfort in knowing that I wasn't listening to crap. But that's always been something that's plagued me from the start.
So when it came time to kind of play this catch up with new music and kind of get into the current release process, this was being done primarily through the internet for you.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's funny because when I first started using the internet to find out about music, I wasn't sort of using it at all to find out about new music. I was using it to find out about old music or newer music that was just kind of like weird or obscure. I used the internet to get really into punk music and really old punk bands, and I was just like collecting all of like these random punk MP3s like they were Pokemon or something off Kazaa and like Soulseek. And the more, I don't know, odd punk or post-punk or noise rock or no-wave bands that I could find out about from the 70s or the 80s, like, the better.
Yeah, but this thing is, I was so far, I just felt so, I felt like I had so much catch up to do in that field. And, my sort of philosophy with books has always been, you know, there are so many classics out there that I felt almost required to like read all the classics before I even started getting into contemporary literature.
Sure.
And that's the philosophy that's carried over to music for me, is that I just want to I want to be knowledgeable in all the things that one should listen to, and I know that sort of by doing that you fall into this trap of becoming dependent on the critical faculty. And one of the things that your channel has helped me to do is just give me another kind of lane for someone else's point of view, and by incorporating different people's sort of reviews of music, I've been able to sort of triangulate my own taste, and that's what's helped me get into sort of weirder and a wider realm of music.
That sort of acknowledgement or respect and awareness of the past that you can have through the internet, because you can just access so much of it, especially in the realm of popular music, popular media. It's really a double-edged sword. I mean, there are some people who seem so ignorant to the past and ignorant to the classics of art that they just plainly lack the fundamentals to put together a enjoyable or a coherent song. And then on the flip side, there are people who sort of use that easy access that we have to the past as just an avenue to grab a really quick blueprint to just essentially be like, well, you know, I'm just going to kind of do a grunge thing, and my record's like just going to sound like a grunge record, and it's not going to challenge anything or do anything different or bring a new sound or whatever. I'm just going to do some Kurt Cobain worship for like 10 tracks or so.
Yeah, I think really the sort of main thing is that I struggle. I think certain people definitely struggle with listening to music without context, and I always am looking for the context in any kind of art that I'm consuming. I'm trying to figure out what people think about it, and you know, the way that it was received at the time and the reviews that it got, or the way that it's grown in the critical eye since it's been released.
Sure.
And what, you know, I remember a couple years ago there was a Miley Cyrus album that came out. I forget what it was, but I was like, I'm going to do an experiment and just try to, you know,
was it Bangers?
Yeah,
the Bangers
yeah,
one.
It was Bangers. It was the one before Dead Pets.
Yep.
And I was like, I'm going to sit down and listen to this. And I'm going to try to put everything I know about Miley Cyrus and the way that I feel about her life and the judgments I make on her personality out of my head, and see if I can just like judge the music for what it is.
And you thought it was genius.
And I thought it was the best album of the last 20 years.
That was the logical conclusion that you had to come to.
Yeah, exactly. That's the only place this story could have possibly led to. No, but
the part where she was like rapping over a trap beat about being a Southern belle, you were just like, this is just a story that's not being told in the American music mainstream.
Exactly, and it's a true American story. But no, I really, the real truth about that story is that I couldn't do it. That I could not put the, you know, my knowledge of everything that came with it, the context, out of my mind. It was just always there. You know, I think part of me really wanted to not like that Miley Cyrus album because of Miley Cyrus, and that's not fair to Miley Cyrus or any artist that you're bringing to. But I feel that even in this conversation about rollouts, you know, context is always going to be a huge part of how at least I consume art and music.
Well, and I feel like we're getting so off track of what we intended to talk about, but I'm fine with that because, you know, we're having an interesting conversation. Context is something that some people bring up to me, asking me or sort of accusing me of sometimes unfairly comparing the current work of an artist to the past work of an artist. And I feel like that's just so impossible.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, even if you blatantly try to erase any references you make to past work in a review or in your own head, when sort of looking at a new album, the reason that you're listening to the new Radiohead album, which many of us will be, is because of all the fantastic albums they put out in the past. You know, they're where they are now because of that material. So to completely ignore it just seems kind of silly, in my opinion. I mean, for sure, each piece of art, you know, should be able to stand on, I guess, its own merits. You know, just because two pieces of art are different doesn't necessarily mean one is inferior to the other. I sort of get the point that accusation is trying to make, but to just simply ignore the past doesn't really make complete sense, in my opinion. And there are some artists that rely heavily on context in order for their art to kind of work within the time that it's being released. You know, take an artist like Drake, for example. You know, so much of his music is about what's going on currently with him, what's going on currently in the sphere of hip hop. That's the case for a lot of modern rappers, you know, which is why some of them, unfortunately, their records aren't necessarily going to translate 5-10 years from now, because much of what they were saying is just kind of in the past. It's not what's happening right now. You know, it's not relevant information. It's outdated news.
Well, I actually think that, you know, it's not too much of a digression from the topic that we're planning to talk about here, which is album rollouts, because you know, the Drake example is a perfect example. You know, if you're reading this dropped, and that was a surprise release, one of the most successful surprise releases ever, I guess, in terms of the way that those songs charted and made money for him. You know, I had such a feeling of, I loved that album, and I loved, you know, being, you know, turning on Twitter and seeing it and going there and downloading it. And that whole process to me was so enjoyable. And you compare that to, and the songs were good, and you compare that to Views, which just came out, which had such a long buildup, you know, and the actual release date wasn't announced till too close to the, you know, to the release. But I was there, I was ready, the hype was building, you know, he seemed to be kind of, you know, getting better with every release. And so it was supposed to be this like apotheosis of his style. And the way that he, you know, he released it, or sort of built it up with, you know, signs in different cities around the world, and the 6 symbol and the whole thing, and, you know, dropping a couple.
And also 0 to 100, you know, which was one of his most iconic singles.
Yeah.
Which there was a lot of drama over that, and Hotline Bling as well.
And Hotline Bling and Summer 16, which I didn't think was, you know, that horrible, and also didn't end up on the album, but we all thought it was going to be on the album when he released it. And
sure,
you know, it dropped. The album dropped. And I'm sitting on my bed, and it's late at night, and I'm just so excited. You know, I'm ready to just.
What an image!
The
Drake album drops. I'm laying on my bed. It's late at night.
This is
candles are lit,
and the
flower petals,
and the 6 is cloudy and cold. And I'm in Toronto. No, and I'm just sitting on my bed. I'm listening to this album, and the first song goes by, and I'm like, okay, you know. That was okay. I think it's probably going to get better as it goes along. And then the second song, and I'm like, oh man, this is like sort of like, it's so simple. It's like not interesting. It's sort of boring. But he's definitely going to get better. And I'm like really hoping and wanting this album to get so good. And as it was dawning on me, and I was like making these sort of bargains with myself as I was getting to the last like 4 tracks, I was like, okay, these last 4 tracks are going to be so good. It's going to redefine.
That's funny. By that point, I had given up hope. So
yeah, I think most people had, but I was so invested in this album being good that I couldn't like let go of it. And then when the album was over, I actually listened to it again. I listened to it twice that night, and I was so disappointed with the whole thing. And it's not like a horrible album or anything, but the context, like what we're talking about, the context is all built into that hype. And the fact that it didn't live up to that hype and what he had accomplished with previous releases, specifically the mixtape that was surprise released, I think goes into the way that we all felt about that album, or are feeling about that. Now, that might disappear as time goes on, but it's definitely part of the way that rollouts play into our reception of an album, I think.
You know, another thing about the rollout of If You're Reading This Is Too Late. And, we sort of look at that album as like, oh, it's a surprise release. And in a way it is. But another thing that was sort of key to the conversation around that record is that simultaneously there was that whole conversation going on about how Birdman is ripping off Lil Wayne and he's keeping him from the Carter 5 coming out. Recently he was quoted as saying, well, actually, I'm not the one that's keeping the Carter 5 from coming out. And there was this huge to-do over whether or not this mixtape was kind of a jab or some kind of retaliation against that argument, against that sort of beef that was going on, and that Drake was putting this out really quickly. It was like a mixtape and it was raw, and he was going to drop it so that he can close out his contract with Cash Money, but yet this new album is out on Cash Money, I believe. So that whole conversation is just like what was completely missing from all the reviews and all the conversation around views, because there was definitely, again, a lot of theorizing that, oh, this is supposed to be Drake's final album with Cash Money, and then he's going to go independent, and he's going to go with Lil Wayne, and they're going to start their own label, and blah 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 blah. And now in retrospect, it all just kind of seemed like it was a part of this greater narrative that was being woven in order to just kind of generate conversation around the music and what Drake was doing.
Well, that's one thing about Drake, is that you're never really sure like what he's doing as a promotional tool. You just have to sort of err on the side that everything is promotional with him, because he's so savvy in his use of social media, and it's not in what he posts that makes him savvy, but it's what he doesn't post, and it's the way that he lets stories kind of generate their own narrative, and if it's working, he doesn't correct it. And that's an example of that.
I just put something up on my Twitter account about that very point, because this was something that was most certainly missing, I think, from like the past 5 years or so, but I think artists have been getting smarter and smarter with it, especially as bands like Death Grips have seen continued success with this. But in the era of music that you and I grew up in, there was a certain amount of mystery that separated you from the artists and the artwork, that kept things interesting and intriguing and kept you on the edge of your seat and kept you waiting for the next release, whereas nowadays, or at least for the past 5 years or so, it seems like in the age of social media, it's all about trying to divulge every single shred of information that you can just to hold people's attention. And now I think we're kind of going back to this value of mystery, because it seems, at least to me, the artists who are actually lasting the longest, holding the most attention, getting fans to plug into the next record are the ones that at least spend a little time back in the shadows and don't spend all their time on social media. And when they do, it's only to add to the mystery and the cryptic message of, I guess, the narrative that they're spinning when they interact with their fans.
Yeah, and I think that is, that's something you can manufacture. And it's something that you can manufacture a little too much too. I mean, I appreciate that mystery and sort of not knowing. Admit that might be because of the way that we experience albums in the past, but even now I still appreciate not knowing too much. And just thinking of like Beyonce's release, the amount of news coverage about how it was about the infidelity of Jay-Z. I just felt like it was influencing the way that we were looking at that album, and it's in an outsized way. And when I listen to it, obviously you hear that in there, but I almost wish I had heard it without knowing that piece of information, because it totally colored the way that I listened to it. And
were you pulling other things out of it?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I was pulling other things out of it, but I was definitely pulling that one main fact out of it because of the information that I was given prior to listening to it, and that was a surprise album. That was an album that did not have any kind of promotional materials besides.
Well, it did have Formation.
It had Formation, and it had the tour, and it had, this. I guess you could say that the Super Bowl was a little bit of the soft build up to it, but as far as the rest of the tracks there, you didn't know what you were getting. And then this narrative started to develop, and I sort of wish that it was completely, naked of any of that. I guess you can't really prevent that. But if you look at something like the James Blake album that just came out yesterday, I'm not sure if you listened to it, but that's something where I felt very much, like I was making my own decisions listening to it. And it goes back to what we were saying, this thing about context. And I think that's one of the advantages of the surprise release, because, if it's a true surprise release, the critics aren't getting advanced copies of it either. Is that true? Would that be true, you think?
Yeah, I think that would most certainly be true. And there are some newer releases that the critics, from what I understand, are not getting advanced copies of. And a lot of them end up having to kind of scramble to get the review out ASAP. I definitely appreciate that, and I've learned to sort of cherish this period of time between when a surprise release drops and the first reviews come out, because this is like, it could be any, it could be the public could be reacting to it in any way. Obviously, you can go on Twitter and see what people are saying, or you could go anywhere to see what people are saying directly about it. But that's what I've learned to love about surprise releases, and I think that really brings up the big question. This big question about rollouts is that is it all a commercial choice? Is it all to do with the commercial prospects of the album, or is there any artistic, value to the way an album is released? I think it's twofold. I think there is artistic merit to how an album is released, but it depends on how the artist is releasing it. To go back to a band like Death Grips, who, and even the new Drake record, because there were definitely some esoteric, strange things about how that album was being promoted, with the signs popping up around everywhere and that sort of thing. And the way that Death Grips indulges in these really odd YouTube videos, like one that featured the late Karen Black, an actress who was acting through like a script that the drummer for the band, Zach Hill, had written, and they released that with like the title Bottomless Pit, and it was just kind of like, okay, well, our new album is titled Bottomless Pit. Here's this weird video of, this late actress acting out this script that I had written out from a very, awkwardly close angle. And then they had dropped a video shortly after that titled Interview 2016, and, immediately fans just went apeshit, because Death Grips does very little in the way of any interviews. And then once you clicked on it, it wasn't an interview at all. It was just kind of a video of a guy interviewing the band.
Yeah.
And with nothing but just kind of like new instrumentals over it. So like there's absolutely no audio of them talking at all in the video.
I love that.
And then they ended up releasing that music as a short EP on Apple Music down the road. So I definitely think there's artistic qualities to album releases. Yeah, I mean, if you decide to take that upon yourself, for some bands like Radiohead, which I was just talking about on Twitter in terms of album releases, they kind of opted for the basic package here for this surprise album release. Yeah. Surprise, if you can call it that, because we have had a song out. We did know an album was coming out. I believe their manager had said that there was an album dropping this year a few months ago. But the thing is, that just kind of makes sense for the band monetarily. I think there's no sense in the internet age for a band like Radiohead, who has a fan base like they do, that values their albums and values conversation about which albums of theirs are the best, and still have full faith in the band being able to drop one of their best records. just dropping your music out of the blue and allowing the fans to kind of just share it with each other and share in it with each other and spread the word amongst themselves makes the most sense. You know, it makes way more sense than spending a small fortune on a PR campaign that is only going to shove the album down the throats of people who don't want to listen to the album anyway.
Exactly.
And the thing is, the music media, the band has gained so much critical acclaim and has built up so much trust and so much, social capital over the past decade, or in the last decade, they can essentially kind of kick back and sort of cash out on that now. You know, they're seen as a classic band in the eyes of many people. Anything that they do is going to be reported on, you know, and not ignored by any stretch of the imagination.
So let's compare the basic package to the most complicated possible rollout package you could ever imagine, which would be the Life of Pablo rollout.
Sure. Yes.
And that is, and we're talking about like whether or not there's artistic value, and in the way that it's released. Rarely do we get an artist who specifically says that the rollout and subsequent changing of the album is part of the artistic package. And I sort of think that like Kanye is a master at retroactively claiming intention on things that he was just sort of doing off the top of his head as it was happening.
Sure.
But that rollout, you know, the way that it played out on social media was, you know,
insane.
It was insane, and it was explicitly stated as a part of this like living album thing. The album itself reflected that once it actually came out. You know, while a lot of people did get down on it for sounding as messy as it did, I thought the messiness, I actually anticipated the messiness and the chaos of the album because that's just how the rollout seemed to be. You know, I got the impression that he was adjusting the album up to the very moments where it actually came out, and it was adjusted further after that. You know, not only in the case of the song Wolves, but the mix that ended up on Apple Music, which Kanye said it would never be on Apple Music. It's never going to be on iTunes. Blah, blah, blah. But anyway, the mix that ended up on Apple Music was a totally different mix than the mix that was on the originally released version on Tidal, which was pirated by countless people. Yeah, and 30 Hours has, you know, references to the Madison Square Garden show.
Sure.
In it. So, I mean, there was clearly, you know, he played what he said would be the album at that show. And, you know, me and I that was just another entry into the Evan Puschak's listening, you know, romantic listening stories to albums. I was listening to that with another YouTuber who's a good friend of mine, Tony Joe, who does the channel Every Frame of Painting. We were listening, you know, to the stream of that, just messaging back and forth, so excited about all this, you know, so excited about all the different tracks and trying to sort of figure, you know, place all the different samples. And then, you know, the album came out and there were already so many changes. There was so much tweet activity between the Madison Square Garden show and the release of the album. And then, like you say, since the release officially went out, there were additional changes. Now, to me, that is a fun thing to experience. Like, I enjoyed experiencing that. But I have to just say that, you know, I've long felt that the music should stand alone and be judged by itself. And when you just take Beyonce, for example, like I could care less about the movie. I could care less about the music videos that came out with Beyonce in a couple years ago. To me, what mattered, I don't care about visual albums. To me, what matters is just the sonics of it, the specific songs. And so as we move farther away from Life of Pablo, you know, what I'm left with is just the individual songs and whether or not I still like them and they still hold up and I'm still listening to them, you know, 3, 4, 5 months down the road or a year down the road. And I think that's kind of strange, interesting thing that a rollout may have artistic value, but it's an artistic value that fades over time and eventually will not be remembered and won't go into the way you judge the specific music.
Yeah. I think I fully agree with you that the music is ultimately what matters. It's ultimately what matters to me. And it totally sucks to hear a lackluster album that maybe had some great singles leading up to it and had a great rollout campaign, and you were anticipating something great and you just ended up getting something meh. However, there's so much music out there today that I personally would classify as being good. There's so much good music out there that, and it's so rare that artists understand this. Mm-hmm. Artists understand how rare it is that you actually produce something that is great and it's amazing and it's your masterpiece and it's the thing that people are going to remember you from for 10 years on. And some artists have already produced that, but yet they still have an entire career ahead of themselves. So they've got to do something, Yeah. So having considered that, we're of course going to see crazy and creative and interesting rollout campaigns for albums come up because, there's got to be something to actually draw attention in to the album before it's released. And just because an album that came out isn't the artist's best work doesn't mean that it's not worth a listen or that it's not worth purchasing or that it's not entertaining. I don't think while I do enjoy listening to great music, I think needlessly pressuring yourself to, as an artist, always be putting out the best thing you've ever done, and as a music listener, always pressuring yourself to listen to the best thing that's ever been released, is just a needless pressure to put onto yourself, and can potentially just suck the fun out of listening to music entirely. So the fact that there is just simply good music out there is fine and is completely normal. So these album rollouts, they're going to happen because there are going to be records that don't necessarily stand the test of time, and they need to get attention somehow.
So there are I guess it would be worth it to sort of go over all the different ways that you could roll out an album, because I'm thinking now.
Well, I mean, with James Blake, you have the insane type with like Kanye or Death Grips, which it's just like completely balls to the wall, crazy,
maximalist.
And yes, it's maximalist, and there's absolutely no rhyme or reason to it whatsoever, but yet it works. If in 2009 I could go back in time and sort of talk with some of the PR people who I was making connections with as the Needle Drop was like a fledgling YouTube channel and just simply a blog, and tell them that in the future one of the most popular bands in the underground was going to be producing all their own music videos, get kicked off of their own label for leaking their album, release many of their albums for free, and cancel tour date after tour date after tour date, and no show after no show, but fans are still crazy about them and love them and spend tens of money on their merch and so on and so forth. They wouldn't believe it. And yet it's happening, before our very eyes. So, you do have these rollouts that are just completely insane. And then, I think you kind of have that basic surprise album package,
which James Blake and Radiohead would both fall under, I think.
Yeah. And I think you also still to this day have your very normal average album rollouts. I mean, my inbox is very much proof of that, as I receive press releases every day for new albums being released. It's just kind of a standard press release, band photo, band bio, single has come out, and maybe the single's doing well and grabbing attention, and maybe it's not, and if it's not, it's kind of tough.
But then you also have where it's released too, because that's
you have where it's released, and you have who it's released to, because you have your promos as well, which unfortunately these days can come around to bite you. Like in the case of Bjork with her last record, the promo of her album leaked, and I believe her and her people made the decision to release the album to iTunes super early, because the album had leaked to the press. And well, the album was released to the press and had leaked to the public. So now I think a lot of artists are just kind of avoiding that problem entirely. And even though these albums are surprise albums, they're giving themselves a little more control over it by, not doing any promos or anything, and just releasing the album when they feel like releasing it. So, you do kind of still have that standard model functioning today, which unfortunately, I think a lot of these smaller groups and artists are sort of fed into the gears of, because they just don't understand that this older model isn't necessarily going to function for them. They don't understand that this is an old, tired model that hundreds and hundreds of other artists are currently working with. And, what's going to separate you from all those other artists who are doing the same kind of promotional campaign as you? So yeah, you have crazy, you have surprise, basic, you kind of have the average, normal package. I'm not sure
within that
what
you
other
have,
types of packages you have.
Within that you have like the camp of people who do pay what you want, or release it for free, or pay what you want, or you have, like Tom York, I think didn't he do a solo album on BitTorrent?
Yeah, he did that BitTorrent thing.
Aphex Twin did one on BitTorrent too, I think, or something like that.
And the group Rat King, I believe, did something on BitTorrent as well. And I think this is also kind of the case for these other artists who are doing these records exclusively for these music streaming platforms. They're almost like commissioned albums and singles, sort of like Future with his latest record too, which seemed very much kind of like, I don't know, in a lot of ways, just a bunch of Dirty Sprite 2 afterthoughts. You also have a lot of these underground rappers that are doing kind of these exclusive mixtape releases with places like Dat Piff and so on and so forth. And they're essentially being paid to do these mixtapes, or maybe even paying. I'm not totally sure how these rollouts happen, but it seems like a big promotional campaign. As soon as you hit the front page of one of these huge mixtape websites, the first thing you see is one of these exclusive mixtapes or exclusive albums, and you can download it just from that website, and it's all just to kind of drive traffic to there. I'm sure the artist is making something off of it. It certainly allows them to tour behind this material, and it gives them a lot of exposure, but I'm not exactly sure what the monetary exchange is there entirely.
Yeah, I think it's basically a free-for-all. I mean, because different things work for different people and they don't have to feed themselves into the same system, everybody's trying to figure out like the exact right combination of release and monetization that works for them. I mean, I think we have the Chance the Rapper mixtape coming out next Friday. Yeah. Now he releases everything for free, notoriously. You have people like Radiohead who will say pay what you want. You have people like this is a ridiculous cut, but you have Michael Cera releasing on Bandcamp. Or was that a pay what you want? I don't know, but
no, I think he charged for that. But you also kind of have like Miley Cyrus dropping that insane album out of nowhere too.
Yes,
the Dead Pets record.
And then you have that was so sort of like cloyingly released directly after the VMAs that year.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I just did not like that. Again, I cannot separate Miley Cyrus as a person from Miley Cyrus's her music. But and then
you also have that traditional model working very well in the case of some bands on some record labels like Profound Lore or Season of Mist or Run for Cover Records, record labels that are very much on the very pulse, or are kind of like, in a way, almost the heart pumping to keep a certain scene alive, whether that scene be like the emo scene or the underground metal scene, or in the case of there are plenty of Bandcamp based vaporwave labels like Dream Catalog, for example, on which they release new albums every day, digitally and on cassette. And they do these short runs of these cassette vaporwave albums, and they sell out of them in like 24 or 48 hours every time they come out with a new vaporwave album. There's some guy out there with like the whole Dream Catalog cassette discography sitting in his bedroom.
It's so funny because my girlfriend last night just asked me, she was just asking me, why are vinyls, so cherished these days? Why don't they do that with cassettes anymore? Why aren't 8-track tapes being released and, different cassettes and CDs? So I guess at least somewhere cassettes are being released, but that brings up another good point, which is, this thing of the vinyl sales last year that were like more successful, the most successful part of the music industry, like the traditional music industry.
Sure, yeah.
Monetarily,
they sold more than just digital sales. Yeah,
that's a rollout question too. I mean, how, in what forms is it only going to be digital from now on, or do you have these like kind of like prestige merch items that people are going to collect? Just because
there's always going to be hardcore fans, there's always going to be collectors out there, and as long as they exist, there's going to be a market for that kind of thing. It's just that now that music is primarily digital, the more casual listeners, the more casual fans can just kind of enjoy music without the hassle that collectors and more passionate music fans would rather put themselves through. I mean, if digital music and streaming platforms were available in the 80s, this is how people would be listening to music then. We would have completely subverted we would have completely sidestepped the whole CD era, and now that CDs are like, near dead, but who knows, maybe they'll see like a resurgence at some point.
I feel like CD will be the only form of media that never experiences a resurgence.
Yeah, because you're essentially just getting ones and zeros on it, and you can just get that in an MP3.
Yeah, or am I just stuck in this time where it's impossible for me to see CDs as cool?
CDs, I can only see them continuing in the sense that, as long as CD players are still being installed into things, there will be CDs, but also I could see them still surviving just based merely on that there's still a lot of great music on CD, and people are going to stumble across old albums on CDs that they want. I mean, you talked about Best Buy earlier. I was in Best Buy this past Christmas because, hey man, I had to get my mom and my mother-in-law that new Adele album, but and they both enjoyed it.
And that's
and I had to get that on CD. Neither of them have functioning record players.
This episode
and also,
of the Drop Podcast sponsored by Best Buy.
God, I wish. So, but also while I was in there, I saw like I got most of the Metallica discography for like $25. So
Season 4
I was just like, yeah. So I was just like, hey, I like a lot of these Metallica records, but I don't own a physical copy of them or anything. And I'm just like, they're kind of cheap, and I really would like to have an excuse to listen to them again.
Every time I walk into Best Buy, I walk out with a full box set of Dawson's Creek. Every time.
Every time. Well, I mean, how many times do you need to buy the same Dawson's Creek box set? Or you mean you're buying a different season every time?
As many times as I have friends. Talk about
because you're just giving it away.
That is my signature gift.
Okay, I see.
Full sequence.
I see. I thought it was more like friends would come over and be like, "Hey man, you got that Dawson's Creek box set?" And you're like, "Hell yeah, I do." And then they borrow it and they never give it back.
Yes, that is exactly my life. But I miss that. And also I remember going into Best Buy when I lived in LA a while ago. And I bought, this was before I knew anything about like the Grateful Dead. And I was younger, and I picked up Working Man's Dead. And I remember putting the album on and putting the CD in, and I pulled over in a parking lot because I could not believe what I was hearing. And I just listened to the whole album, just amazed, because I thought the sound was going to be different. I didn't know what they were going to be like. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And that is something that I miss about that era for sure. I don't think I'll ever pull over in a car for a digital release.
Maybe not, and also there's definitely going to be, with digital releases, less in the way of, I guess, this feeling of investment, because you don't have to really go out of your way to, hear or acquire a digital release, but with music being as digital as it is, it makes it easier to kind of incorporate it into your life. And you could still certainly create meaningful moments around the music that you're listening to by incorporating it at certain times in your life. I remember at one point, I gave, just out of, I think in preparation for their latest album, a solid listen to the Dirty Projectors album, Bit of Orca. And immediately after listening to the record, and I think I probably had a download of it at the time, and then I just bought the CD later when I realized that I liked the album. I had this whole shot of nostalgia from 2009, and I was just like, whoa, I just remembered all these 2009 things that was kind of, which was kind of weird. Because I just remember listening to that album so much that year. And again, even though, there are some albums that I only have copies of digitally, I still do enjoy them a lot. And again, I sort of, create those, moments in my life with the music by either listening to that music at certain times, or maybe I was going through a certain something or a certain experience while I was really big into that album, or just kind of sharing that music with other people. So, while music is very much digital now, I don't think it necessarily makes it any less meaningful,
Of course not. It's just a matter of where I'm getting it, like where I'm first hearing about it. That is almost exclusively now on my computer at home, because I'm not picking up anything that I don't know. I'm not somewhere else picking up something. I'm hearing about some kind of release on a website, and then I'm going. That was the big change for me of the music revolution, talking about rollouts, is that when Spotify came out and started to become big, it was like as soon as you heard about an album, you could listen to it immediately. If it was
Sure.
out, you could get to it immediately. And there was no going out to get it, or asking if a friend had it or something, or trying to get over somebody's house to listen to it. It was the immediacy of hearing about it, getting to read a review about it, and then listening to it all at the same time that really revolutionized the way I think I listen to music. It doesn't change the fact that I have a lot of meaningful experiences with new music. It's just different. And I feel like a lot of this rollout stuff is just a sort of modern rollouts are just a way of saying, yeah, this is how it works now. There's nothing we can do about manufacturing the way you're going to hear this album. So let's just give it to you, and let you make this the experiences for yourself and the decisions for yourself, because we're not going to be able to influence you one way or the other.
I still have no doubt that there are lots of rollouts today that are very, very planned and measured and manufactured. To go back to someone like Miley Cyrus, every detail of her persona and everything she does in the public eye, from, I'm sure, this Dead Pets record to the whole Wrecking Ball video. All of that is planned to the T.
Oh, yeah.
But in the internet age, it seems like as far as album promotions and music creation too, there's certainly more room and wiggle room for creativity and volatility. It seems like pretty much any artist, from Beyonce to Kanye with The Life of Pablo to Miley with Dead Pets to Kid Cudi with Speeding Bullet to Heaven, can just drop an album out of nowhere, can drop an amazing album, can drop the worst album of their whole career. While there are a lot of groups out there that are still giving into... While there are still a lot of groups out there that are still giving into the whole process of putting out a very formulaic, a very measured, a very focus grouped album, where we have to put out a fucking song for... We need to put out a hard song. We need to put out a song for the ladies. We need to put out a song for the club. We need to put out a song for here and there and blah, 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 blah. And it just ends up creating this completely personalityless, just formless, uncohesive mess crap of a record. A lot of artists are taking risks. You know, there aren't always great results with those risks, but I see a lot of risks being taken. And again, even if I'm not loving the record, it still makes for an interesting popular music landscape to engage with. I personally wouldn't want to be a music critic, you know, if I can use that dirty word, during any other time other than maybe in the future. You know, I'm most curious about what music is going to be like after I'm dead, personally.
It will be a full body experience.
Hopefully by then, Kanye will be releasing The Life of Pablo Part 5.
V27. Completely new, completely different album.
He'll be doing a he'll be doing the life of, it'll just be a part of the Life of album series where he just does a series of albums after the great, you know, artists and painters of the abstract or the Renaissance era. You know, he'll get the life of Michelangelo and the life of Donatello, and he'll just be, you know, hitting up all the great artists.
And 100 years from now, he'll still be the most important artist for even 400 more years after that. That's the amazing fact that we all must remember about Kanye West. But I will say just to maybe wrap this up, but I think that one of the great things about the new landscape, and you know, I mean, we talk about rollouts. Rollouts are definitely just symptomatic of the new musical landscape. I mean, the way that they changes with the way that the industry is. But I think
and the way that the audience wants it.
Yeah,
and the way
which
is really their.
I mean, I think what's really nice about it is that there's a lot of really huge, mega A-list artists who are releasing albums with a lot of attention to album cycles and, you know, a complete package. And I mean, I know that their singles are still a big part of everything, but you know, I do see a lot more risks being taken by A-list artists who are releasing albums without any, you know, particular emphasis on singles, and that's exciting to me. I mean, I always will cherish just listening to an album from front to back. And this is just giving me the like when an album drops and it's a surprise release or whatever it is, I'm like, oh, that's a nice package, and I can't wait to just take that and go onto my bed and, you know, buy a plane ticket to Toronto and listen to it on the top of the CN Tower, and really take in the icy cold R&B feel.
Well, also not as much unwavering attention paid to what time of year the album is being released too. You know, when I first started getting into this, there was very much a certain flow and predictability to the album releases of the year. You know, I mean, a lot of the biggest and best and most popular releases are being put out after tax season, late spring, during the summer when people are out of school and people are free and they're out and about. And a lot of the more niche releases that labels don't think they're going to sell as many of, a lot of the smaller artists get released toward the beginning of the year, right after Christmas, when people aren't spending as much money, or around the holidays or something like that. And now it seems like anybody can drop a huge, monstrous album at any time of the year, really.
Yeah, and it's, you know what, it's really the only sort of major art form that, I guess not the only, but I'm just thinking of film and how that is still so, you know, the industry is still so determinative of things like what you're talking about, like when it's released in the year and, you know,
Sure.
how it's going to perform and what it's released behind and the whole thing. There's, you know, it's definitely been disadvantageous to certain, you know, to musicians in a way, but this flattening of the landscape has just produced like so many weird sparks that yeah, you can't help but be excited about what's coming out.
All All right, my guest on this episode of the show has been Mr. Evan Puschak, a.k.a. the Nerdwriter on YouTube. We have a link to his Twitter and his YouTube channel down in the description. Check out his stuff. And thanks for coming on and having this great conversation with me about the promotion of contemporary music in the age of social media.
It is my pleasure, and I expect to see the James Blake review later on today.
Only if you're writing it. Will you write it for me?
Sure. I just have to finish my piece on how the U.S. government spends money, and then I'll get to work on The Color in Anything by James.
Okay. Well, I have no doubt that you will speed through writing about that because you really want to get to writing about the James Blake review instead.
That's all I want to do.
All right. Thanks for coming on, man.